Hello everyone and welcome back to Video Editing 1 with Professor Harris. Today we're going to be getting into Lesson 6, Introduction to Transition Effects. I'm going to apologize first off. I have been losing my voice. I'm sure you all might already know that. I did announce that in class. But I hope that this middle ground where I found is enough to communicate what we're trying to learn today. Alright, so let's look at this lesson's goals for this video. First, we're going to learn how to apply transition effects, modify those transition effects, remove effects, and create audio crossfades. So let's get into it. Here we are back on Avid Media Composer. So I am going to have you guys move your project directory essentially to this location. I'll talk more about it in class, but it would be great if you could start working in the program by yourself on your own time, and just for anyone generally, if you're watching this, just keep familiarizing yourself with the program and you will always get better. So let's go ahead and open this project because this is the project we'll be working in today, Rock Climber. And let her boot up. So even in simple, straightforward projects, visual effects often influence a scene's timing and dramatic feel. Therefore, as an editor, it's just as important to learn why to add effects as it is to learn the steps to apply them. In this lesson, we're going to explore the fundamentals of adding effects and learn a few ways to do that along the way. Okay, so creating transition effects. Visual transition, the most common being a dissolve or fade, influences a sequence's rhythm. They can also add drama or resolve a challenging cut point. So they can also convey the passage of time or even the changing of consciousness. A dissolve blends together the images between adjacent shots in a sequence, whereas a fade blends the image to or from black. Editors often add fades at the beginning or end of a scene, but sometimes they use them creatively elsewhere in their sequences. So you'll use the same basic methods to create video dissolves and audio crossfades. Since these are the most commonly used effects, Media Composer provides a very quick way to add these right into our sequence. But first, I'm going to close this sequence. I'm going to switch over to another sequence. We'll go to Rock Climber. I'll go B-Hairs. We'll go Promo. And now we are launched up in the Rock Climber Promo. You will also have this, except it'll say Student Rock Climber Promo V1, I think. Something along those lines. So let's figure out where we want to add a transition and do that with the Quick Transition tool. All right, so first you're going to park your position indicator near a cut. So we'll do this one. So we're going to park it near a cut. Then we're going to turn on, make sure where we want this effect to go is selected in our track selectors. So I've got my V1 selected. Here, let me drag this out. This is kind of obnoxious. I got my V1 selected, so I know that this transition is going to go right there on my V1. You can park it closer to the cut point if you want. And then in the Quick Transitions dialog box, we're going to click the Quick Transition button, the timeline, and that is this guy right here. This is the Quick Transition button. You can also hit, I believe it's backslash. So right underneath your backspace key is your backslash key. So you can go ahead and hit that. I'm going to hit it on my keyboard because you should be working with keyboards or your keyboard. All right. And then it instantly brings up this Quick Transition menu. So we're going to go ahead and hit the add button, or we can hit enter on a keyboard, and that will immediately add a dissolve by default directly to this cut point. So I'll hit add, and boom. Now we can see it has added the transition. As shown here, we can see, let me zoom up. We can see this little pink guy with little handles to it. This displays the dialogue line, and it represents the transition actually physically or visually in our timeline. So now we know that there is a transition here, and we can see these handles, and that is, again, the real levels inside our transition. Okay, now we should probably test that this works. There's no point in adding a transition effect. So if we scrub over it, we can see that dissolve has worked. But let's see if we can play it. My computer's acting a little weird today. I don't know why it won't play. Anyway, but we do know that it worked. So we can see that dissolve work very nicely. But what if you want to add a dissolve that's shorter than 1 second? Or what if you want to add a fade to the beginning of our sequence, like over here? It would be nice, a lot cooler if this faded in and then boom, we see that hand smack. So the way we'll do that is we'll move the position indicator way over here to the left, as close to the edit that cut where we want that to occur. We're going to hit that backslash key, or you can click it here. Again, this doesn't exist. This button doesn't exist. Hit the backslash key. And then we have a few options. Let's go through some of these. So what we're going to want to set it to, it's typically set by default to centered on cut. Because we're trying to start this shot off, we're going to do start at cut. And that way it's actually, we can see this, it's moved over to the right now. Now it's actually going to fade in into the shot. Whereas before, let's go ahead and do that. We'll do centered on cut, which is again default. We do add, you can see it adds this filler at the beginning. But we're not interested in that filler. We don't want that. So we'll go ahead and add this back. Quick transition menu. We'll click start at cut. And then we can even drag out the duration. So my project by default is set to 24 frames per second. And so the duration 24 frames is 1 second. Duh. So we could shorten this. Let's say we only wanted that fade in to last, we'll do 15 frames. Now we can see this gets shorter and we're ready to go. So I'll go ahead and hit add now and we can see it appear in our timeline. I'm going to hit the space bar and nothing's going to happen, but I'm going to drag through and we can see it now fades in from black. We get that nice fade in and then boom, that hand smacks and we're awesome. We're on our way. Awesome. Very, very cool. Now, let's look at a few more settings. So if you want to adjust the fade's duration, again, we can reposition. We can also reposition this. So a few notes here. So if you want to adjust the fade's duration, we can reposition the position indicator over a quick transition icon. Click the quick transition button or backslash, and then you can adjust the duration field value and click add. So if we wanted to change this from 1 second to longer or shorter, we just park it over top the effect. We can re-click this button, the quick transition menu, or we can hit the backslash on our keyboard. And we can adjust the duration right here with the frames. My project by default is set to 24 frames per second, so 24 frames equals 1 second. We could change this. We'll go 40, and boom, now we've got a longer transition. We click add, and it's going to make that update right there. So to add a fade out at the end of a sequence, we'll park the position indicator at the end of the last shot because we have this just cut to black. So we'll position it here, and then we'll repeat the process. We'll click our quick transition menu, but this time we're going to do, end at cut. So Avid already detected this is the end of my segments, so it's going to do end at cut, and we can add there. And boom, now we have an effect that's going to nicely fade out this shot right here at the end, which is great. Since Media Composer simultaneously calculates and with smooth playback these dissolve effects, you can just click add instead of add and render. I'm sure you saw that earlier. So if we try and add one here, we can see this add and render button. We'll talk more about this going forward, but essentially, I'll give you a quick rough course on this right now. These effects, sometimes what they do is so complicated, it needs to be rendered before it can be played. And so that's just kind of the basics of it. But simpler effects like dissolves and fades and cuts are instantly rendered. It's not that too hard to process. Cool. As mentioned, you can make further adjustments in the quick transition dialog box. For example, you can adjust the dissolve's position and duration, but let's create a custom dissolve now. So we did talk a little bit about changing duration here, but we can get even more nitpicky than that with our own custom dissolve. So we'll again move our position indicator to a cut point. We'll make sure the proper tracks are selected. Pro tip, if you forgot to select your tracks before you came in, there's track selectors right here. You can say, oh, I want A1 and A2, and that would dissolve the audio as well as the video. But we'll just leave it on audio right now. or sorry, video, not audio. We'll just leave it on video for now. We'll adjust the duration. We can either set a specific value, or even cooler, we can drag the sides of this left and right. So say we want a really long shot, we could do that, and then we could slide it around and figure out exactly where we want this cut point to start, or this dissolve to start. You can make it shorter even, you can make it even shorter, you can make it real small and drag it back and forth. And it automatically snaps to those head and tail frames, so you don't have to worry about doing that yourself or thinking you messed up anything. Cool. What else can you do? You can reposition the dissolve, like I said, and then once we got all the settings we want, if we figure out where we want it, see it says position changes to custom rather than starting at cut or centered. So we got our own position set for this, and we can go ahead and hit add. Now we have our own custom dissolve here. We'll look at this. It's horrible because it goes from one speaking shot to another, so it just looks weird. We'll remove that by hitting Command Z, but we'll keep going. So as I just displayed, Media Composer adds a custom dissolve to the timeline. Let's take a closer look at how Media Composer creates a dissolve and all the other transition effects, so that you can avoid challenges with insufficient source. So when we're creating these effects, Media Composer draws on frames of the footage that are not cut into the sequence. This means you need to have enough handle to create desired transitions. Remember that word, handle. Handle is the video available at the beginning and end between our cuts. So let me pull up an example. If I go to video here, I load this shot. Oh, we got the wrong stuff. There we go. I load this shot. Let's say from here, set in and set out are added to the timeline. I already selected this clip and then added it here. Let's pretend it was this shot. We have enough handle. This beginning area is handle. This end area is handle. The dissolve, if we wanted to do a dissolve at the end of the shot into this other shot, Media Composer would need to read frames that happen after this out to then properly adjust it in this as an effect, as a transition effect. So if we come down and we open the quick transition dialog box, we get this bad boy. So we can see the A side and B side frames that are available to us. So the quick transition dialog box illustrates the sequence's endpoints and outgoing shot A side on the left of the cut point. So what's available left of the cut point that cuts to an incoming B side to the right of the cut point over here. So the number of frames on the left side are the B side's available handle in the example here. So this is the B side. We know how many frames. So before this shot actually got to this point and we set it in our timeline, we know we have 87 frames in front of that B shot, 78 frames behind the end of that A shot to work with for our transition effects. Cool. So to determine the maximum dissolve duration, you can add two handle values together in order, or an example, we could create a big dissolve, so we could add both these numbers together, and that would use up the maximum amount of footage at the beginning of our B shot and the end of our A shot to create that dissolve. All right, now that you've explored how to add dissolves in your sequence, you're ready to add multiple dissolves at once and remove unwanted dissolves. So adding multiple transition effects. When you watch your favorite films and TV shows, you'll see straight cuts at most edits. When you watch music and videos or movies, game trailers, and so on, there'll be highly stylized pieces, and you'll see lots of these different transition effects. In Media Composer, you can easily add quick transition effects to a series of edits. This saves time when you want to add dissolves to multiple edits in a row, like a montage. Media Composer doesn't limit the number of transitions you can add, but good aesthetic judgment and common decency should. So let's talk now about adding multiple edits and multiple transitions into your timeline. So select our destination tracks. So we'll deselect A1. We'll just slide over here. We'll set in mark in our timeline, and we'll go to wherever our region is, and we'll set out mark. So now I have this region selected. Go ahead and click the quick transition button, or we can press backsplash on our keyboard. Boom, we can open it up. And now, in the quick transitions dialog box, want to select apply to all transitions, in to out. Boom. So now we have a duration of 32 frames, and it's going to go on all these different shots. We'll go ahead and then click add. Boom, we've added a bunch of dissolve transitions to our sequence now. When I scrub through here, we're going to see a few of them. First one, boom, another one, another one, another one. Yeah, all kinds of transition effects. But this doesn't fit our aesthetic. I don't think a bunch of dissolves. I think this is supposed to be a little snappier of a scene. So let's look at now removing these transition effects. So not every transition you add will improve your sequence. In this case, this clearly doesn't. So often a straight cut is the proper tone and maintains a stronger rhythm than a transition effect. So good news, we can remove multiple effects at the same time. We'll just use the remove effect button or the transition manipulation tool. So to remove with the transition effect with the remove effect button, all we have to do is park the position indicator over an effect, and then all we have to do is click this little button here, remove effect. Boom, that effect disappears from our timeline. Do the same thing here, remove effect. Boom, it's that easy. Next, to remove transition effect using the transition manipulation tool, we can make sure it's highlighted or selected. This is the transition manipulation tool. If this was deselected, I wouldn't be able to select these. I'd be kind of back in edit mode. We'd see the segment mode tool and the trim type tool working, but we're going to go ahead and select transition manipulation. We can see those little handles appear, and now we can even select these and we can delete them this way. So I've got mine selected. I'll hit delete or backspace on my keyboard, and that would remove it. Cool. So a couple of things we should note here as well with the transition manipulation tool is that when you click the transition, it's going to change our corner display. It's going to change our composer screen. We'll see these 6 frames, and these are representative to what's going on with our little guy here, our little transition, and what happens when we drag out the handles and even move it left and right on the transition point. So when you click the transition manipulation tool, the composer window again changes, and you can troubleshoot unwanted frames essentially by using that upper window. You can also monitor the transition's duration as you adjust it by looking at the transition effects field value shown on the screen. So we can change this, and it'll tell us right here that value, how many frames it is now. So we can know, it's a second and 8 frames. We can know it's, okay, now we're down to 20 frames, 22, 24. It's 1 second, because again, we're set to 24 frames per second as a default. And then you can maintain a center on cut alignment while adjusting the transition's duration by holding the alter option on Mac and PC. So if I click this handle and I hold option, it's going to make sure that I'm dragging only from this one side and that it's keeping it centered on that cut point. So no matter which side I'm pulling from, it's not going to affect whether or not it's going to make sure it cuts on the dead center of the cut, and we're dragging the handle on both sides at the same time. Cool. As you can see the transition corner display includes the 6 frames of footage. These are specifically handle. So the top row is the A side clips outgoing. That's the far left. The first, which is the first, and then middle and last frames being used to create the transition. So the bottom row shows the B sides incoming, right, and the first, middle, and last frames being used to create the transition. So we know what's going on now when I drag this around. So moving on here, we're going to look now at some problems that might arise when we're working with these transitions. So I have a screenshot directly from the book here. So it says, notice the mismatched frames called out in the image above. So we've got the hand, and then boom, it splits and the hand's gone. So this would kind of look like a flash frame when you were going through that dissolve. So how would we fix this? If you'd fix this by adjusting transitions, duration, and possible position, you're correct. So essentially, these could be flash frames that are left behind from another edit, or maybe a shot that stopped down and then starts up, but it's still one video file. And you could fix these just by essentially trimming the shots and using less handle even when applying these different effects. So that might be one way that you could fix this. At the end of lesson 5, you monitor the trim counters using the trim buttons in the trim mode. In fact, transition corner display is a trim mode feature, and the transition manipulation tool activates the trim mode when you click a transition. So you can also edit and fix flash frames that appear in a dissolve and other transitions. So just a quick note there, because I don't want to go into the steps of breaking my project just to display this when the book displays it already. Essentially, you see stuff that's not supposed to be there, you can go in and you can re-edit it, or you can just adjust the handle length used in your transition. Cool. Hope that makes sense. Let's quickly move on to accessing effects from the effect palette. So in Media Composer, you can add more than just simple dissolves. For example, you can click the Add pop-up menu in the Quick Transition dialog box, and you've revealed additional blend transitions. So if we're in here and we click the Add, we can pick from a few different kinds of transitions, but there's even more than that, and we'll get to that through the Effects palette. So there are 3 ways to open the Effects palette. First is to click the Effects palette vertical title bar in the bin container window. That is right here. If you never noticed this, right under bins, when you're in editor workspace over here, right under bin is Effects palette. So boom, we're in the Effects palette. Another way we can access the Effects palette is by going to choose tools, and then Effects palette is in here somewhere. I'm too lazy to find it, but it's in here. I know that. And then another way you can do it is just by hitting Control 8 or Command 8 on your keyboard, and that will also bring it up. Cool. So to make finding effects easier, the Effect palette contains 4 tabs listed across the top. First we have Filters, which we're in now. Next we have Transitions, boom, Audio Track, and Audio Clip. Quick reference point, Filters is also known as segment effects. Just know that going forward. And then when you click the tab with a list of related categories appears. So when we click transitions, we're going to get a list of related categories. And we can use this to find what we want. So we can select in the left panel what we're looking for. And we'll go ahead and hit dip to color here. Cool. Now, essentially, you can find any available effect in the effect palette. To add a transition, though, to our from the effect palette, we can have making sure the effect palette is open. We can click the transition tab at the top here, and we can simply drag it from the effect palette down into our timeline. So we can add it pretty much anywhere we want. You'll see little blue comes up that tells us, yes, you can drop this here. So we'll add it right here. Cool. Very similar to the last transition. We can see it's got the handles and everything, and that is very awesome. Okay, so we've got our dip to color effect added to our timeline here, so we can see it doing its thing. Very nice, very nice. Cool. So by the way, a green dot next to an effect here in the effect palette means that the effect doesn't require rendering and will play back in real time. So green dots also appear in the timeline, so we can quickly identify these real-time effects. So you can see a little green dot there, little green dot there, and green dots in a lot of these effects here. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but as we get into more complicated effects, those will require rendering, and we'll get to those colors later. But now, we're going to look into modifying the effects that we've added to our timeline. So once we apply our transition effects from our effect palette, we can adjust their parameters in effects mode. To switch to effects mode, we can do one of the following. We can click the effects mode button in the timeline palette. We can go to Windows Workspace Effects, which would be this, and then Effects. Or we can simply click the effects mode workspace right here. Ta-da! And we're instantly into effects mode. So for quick access to effects mode, some and a lot of people map the effect mode button to the key on your keyboard. This becomes handy if you accidentally close the effects mode by clicking out of the timeline track, clicking on the timeline track code in the timeline. So instead of being on our effects, we accidentally hit the timeline, and boom, it doesn't have our effects mode back up the way we want it. But now it does. So you can just click the effects mode button. You don't have to map a button, but if you want to, you can. You can also just click this little guy, effect mode. So again, if I was in here, I could hover over an effect, and click effect mode. Anyway, moving on. So once you've entered the effects workspace, there's a couple of changes that occur. The effect editor appears, and the record monitor morphs into the effect preview monitor. So now we only got one monitor, and this is monitoring what we do. So since we're going to be working in this a lot, let's identify the different parts. Number one is this region. It is our effect editor. So it opens when you enable the effects workspace or the effect mode, so you can customize the effect that's selected in the timeline. So we do have a timeline selected effect, and our effects editor is open. Next, we have effect duration. That's down here. So ours right now is set to 1, which is 1 second. Again, 24 frames. Remembering that information from earlier. This displays the duration and works as a data entry field if we want to change it. So if I wanted to make this a 2-second effect, I could just click here, type 2, hit enter, boom. It's going to make my effect longer. Very nice. I'm going to revert that back to 1 just for the sake of this tutorial video. Number 3, we have the effects preview monitor. So this displays the selected effect that's highlighted in the timeline. Number 4, we have the position bar. So that's this bad boy underneath. The position bar lets you scrub through the selected effect without leaving the effect mode. So we can see the entire cause and effect of this effect right here as we play back and forth. Essentially the same thing as scrubbing through here, but if we scrub through here, we lose our effect editor here. So we can re-enable that by clicking the effect mode button there. What else can we do? We can also playback loop. We have the playback loop button here. We click play here. Something's going on. With my computer, when I'm recording these videos, it doesn't allow me to play videos in Avid Media Composer. It seems to be too much for my processor, but I'm sure that won't be too obnoxious going forward, hopefully. All right. Next, we have the effect mode button. Again, we're familiar with this one. This essentially, when enabled, it opens the effect editor. So pretty easy. And then we have the transition effect icon that's here in the timeline. That's what that little pink guy is that's highlighted. It becomes highlighted when we're in effect mode. So we know we're editing that specific effect. So when working in effect mode, you use the position bar under the effect preview monitor to scrub through an effect. Why? Because again, if you click in the timeline, like I did earlier, we'll exit the effect editor, and we can lose our hard work, right? So the effect editor organizes effect parameters into collapsible groups. The parameters vary depending on the effect you applied. To open the group and display its parameters, you can click a disclosure triangle here. That would be these guys here, these tiny triangles. So we got foreground and background. Cool. Once you open, you can adjust the parameters and then preview them in the effects preview monitor to modify an effect in effect mode. So first we can select the track containing the effect, check. So we've got track selected. We'll place a position indicator over the effect in the timeline, check. Then we'll open the effect editor by doing one of the following. You can click the effect mode button. We can go to the effects palette, or we can go to Windows Workspace Effects. And then in the effect editor, we can click the disclosure triangle next to the parameter group to reveal the available options. These bad boys here again. And we can drag the sliders to modify parameters and values. So we can move all kinds of stuff. That's the opacity. We can swap sources. So now we've got a swap going on. We can change the background color. Click this and we can select different colors. Let me find move the position indicator. Oh, of course that closes everything, but I can reopen it again just with that one click there on the effect mode. But you can see as I slide around here that this window is getting colors. I can source a color from the project and use that as my dip to color when it comes to this. So, and it can give me values. So R42, G46, B30 something on. And I can set these values in here and start goofing around with that stuff. So yeah, now we have a different fade to color. And we can just goof around with it, do whatever we want. Lots of fun. All right, so the effect interface layout varies depending on how you enter effect mode and whether you use one computer screen or two. Let's dive into this a little bit. So when you click the effect mode button, regardless of one or two computer screens, you stay in the edit workspace. So if we are in edit and I click the effect mode button, I can access these effect settings while still just being in the edit workspace, right? I can adjust these hues and values. And with this open, we can see that our record monitor is still the effect preview monitor. So I could move this by grabbing the purple region and I could snap this to an area on my screen. So let's say I wanted to put it at the bottom of bin. I want to split my bins in half. I could have my effect editor down here, and I could be doing all kinds of fun stuff, editing the hues and goofing around. What else? So you can access the effect mode just by hovering over, still in edit mode. What else? The composer window keeps the two monitor display, like I said, but again, the record monitor is now the effect preview monitor. The bin container stays as is for easy access of bins. So obviously, when I did click this, our bins window didn't go away. When you click effects in the workspace bar on a system with one display, the interface changes to the effects workspace. The composer window converts to a single effect preview monitor. The effects editor opens. So when I'm clicking to effects, all that stuff I just said, that all happens here on a single display. What else happens? The effect editor opens between the effect preview monitor and the effect palette, and the effect palette and bin container remain the same, both easily accessible as needed. Yeah, so we still have the bins and the effect palette. It's all still here and usable when we're in effects mode. And then when we open the effects workspace on a two-computer screen, the interface changes to the effects workspace. The composer window retains two-monitor display, but the record monitor changes to the effects preview monitor, and the source monitor remains as is. We also see the effects editor gets docked with the effects palette besides the source monitor, and the bin container remains open for easy access as well. So that's what would happen if we were on a two display, but we're not. We're on a single display. All right, let's move into creating an effect template. Suppose you create an effect and you want to reuse it in the current sequence or in another sequence or in another project entirely. You can just save the template, and then that way you can apply that template instead of recreating that effect over and over and over again. So let's say I was very passionate about this random blue hue I made here with my dip to color effect. I can save it. So to save an effect as a template, we can open the effect editor for the effect. Then we can place the cursor over the effect icon in the upper left corner of the effect editor. So that's this little guy here. And then with the cursor, when it changes to a finger, we can click the effect icon and drag it to a bin. And if you notice over here on the left, I have an effects bin. So I can save this directly to my effects bin. And now, in my effects bin, which is open now, I have a saved effect, which I can then simply reapply to other areas in my segment. So I can have identical blue fade outs or crossfades in my project, dip to colors. So This is super, super helpful when you make a specific kind of transition or any other effect and you really want to apply it in other places in your project. Okay, now let's look at creating audio crossfades. So straight cuts in the audio tracks can sometimes sound abrupt or introduce a digital click or pop. Thankfully, audio crossfades can usually fix these sort of sound errors. Like a dissolve on video, an audio crossfade blends two audio segments on either side of the edit. In Media Composer, you'll create crossfades by applying a dissolve to the audio cut point. That means you'll apply the same transition effect you used on video tracks. So you already know how to add and modify audio crossfades. So in terms of workflow, you might apply audio crossfades while building a sequence or during the finishing process. Whichever aligns with your personal preference or work style is fine. But let's look at how the same tools and techniques you've already used with video work with audio. So you'll commonly use audio crossfades to smooth out the pops and clicks in audio cut points and fade or blend music segments and sound together. As a general rule, use very short 1 to 4 frame crossfades when it comes to audio. So I'm going to deselect my V1 track here, and I'm going to select my A1, so I'm selected on audio. And I'm going to add a transition between these two audio segments. So I'll put the position indicator there. We'll do the exact same thing we did before, quick transition. We'll set it to dissolve, but like it says in the book, like it says in real life, when you have cuts between dialogue or interview, you're going to want to make it very short. Because if you have that extra handle length, something he said prior, something that happened prior, it will blend together and you'll get unwanted dialogue instead of a good transition. So we'll do 2 frames just to keep it nice and tidy here. We'll click add. We'll see that has added here in our timeline. So that's great. For music though, you'll want to do the exact opposite by adding a 1 second or longer crossfade to slowly fade the music in or out of a scene. You might also apply a long crossfades to natural sound or ambiance depending on the situation. So with music, you're definitely going to want to make sure you're doing a slower fade out or crossfade, like it says when you have scenes rolling. Abrupt audio changes is not going to make your project feel like it flows. So you want that consistency. Many editors prefer to use audio keyframes to better control how slowly the music fades out. This topic will be covered in Media Composer Fundamentals 2. So when we get into the second half of the semester in MC101, we'll get into that and how to use keyframes to lower your audio exactly the way you want it. In addition, you can apply dissolves to multiple edits at once. Adding dissolves to every video edit can seem strange, but oftentimes it becomes a lifesaver, and it can become a lifesaver with audio especially too. Cool. To apply audio crossfades to multiple edit points though, we can activate the audio target tracks, so making sure they're selected, and then we'll set in and out marks like I just said. In and out. And then we can park the position indicator near an edit point and click the quick transition. Yep. So park it here, quick transition. It's going to come up. We're going to set our thing to 2 frames. It's going to be magical. And then we're going to make sure we hit apply to all transitions, in to out. And that's a very important step. And then bingo, we hit add. Boom. Now we've got all these new audio transitions in this interview, and it's going to sound nice and crispy. That's my enable digital audio scrub button. You may or may not have this mapped. If you wanted to map this to your keyboard, you could by doing Command 3, and then in play, you can find the digital audio scrub here, which you would then just drag to your an available space on your timeline menu or timeline button palette, I guess you could say. Cool. All right, let's move on. So you may find that one or more clips within a selected region do not have enough handle to apply an effect, especially if you're adding a longer crossfade. If so, Media Composer will warn you with an insufficient source message. So if there's not enough handle on these audio clips for it to properly fade in between, it's going to hit you with the notification. Okay, so let's give you guys an idea of what that notification will look like. So I'm going to set into my timeline. I'm going to set out my timeline. I'm going to create the effects. There's a quick transition. And then I'm going to set it to something ridiculous like 200. And then I'm going to hit apply to all in and out transition. I'll hit add, and it's going to give me the insufficient source. So what I can do is size to fit. And that's just going to snap everything to as much as possible, because I have handle length that doesn't exist because of the amount I'm trying to set. So I'll just size to fit, and I can do that for all the areas where this doesn't work along my whole timeline. Now I have size to fits all the way along, and if I just scrub through here, we're going to have the most hideous looking, this looks really dumb, but yeah, there you go. That would be a way to fix that. Awesome. Okay, so with that, you're ready to complete the last exercise for this lesson. But first, some final notes about audio crossfades. So if you prefer, you can add an audio crossfade by dragging and dropping the dissolve effect in the blend category onto an audio cut in the timeline. So if we wanted to use the effects palette, making sure we were on transitions, then we could hit dissolve and we could just drag these directly into our timeline. And I'm just replacing stuff. And then if we wanted to, remember, you could hit the effect mode and you could edit the details around that. Or you could go to the effects workspace and have even more customizable control about how this specific audio transition or effect is going to work. I gotta make sure your tracks are selected too when you do that. It did work because I dragged it directly too, but you're gonna want to make sure your track selectors are on too when you're doing this stuff, just to keep your brain in that state of mind, making sure everything's going to the correct locations. Cool. All right. That is it for lesson 6. Thank you guys so much for watching. Again, I'm sorry about the way my voice sounds. Hopefully it'll get better and I'll be coughing a little bit less. But thank you again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.